Emissaries of the Gospel podcast. My name is Jeremy Brown, and I'm your host. Please make sure that you click the subscribe button and the bell icon for notifications. That really helps this channel and it helps our evangelistic ministry. And that being said, let's get right into the content today. I wanted to talk a little bit about Michael Bird and some of the things that he's said recently on his Substack. And before I even do that, real quick, I wanted to give a plug for a book that a good friend of mine has put out recently. It's called A Magical World: How the Bible Makes Sense of the Supernatural. And this is from Matthew C. McGuire. This, I can guarantee you, whether you agree with all of his conclusions or not, you're going to find out that it's well researched and it's well worth reading. So that's A Magical World by Matthew C. McGuire. Now, getting to Michael Bird, he posts this. I'm just going to read this. It says, "What authority does a husband have over his wife?" And then he says, quote unquote, "To regard the wife as inferior in rank or subordinate and submissive is the sufficient condition to treating her as inferior in worth." So this is a very classic error here, and I don't even know if it's an error on his part or if it's him intentionally being deceptive, right, and manipulating the language. And so I included this over here. I thought this was clever. A friend of mine um, put this, responded to a thread on this with this little meme, I guess you'd call it. It says, "Point of order, logical fallacy, equivocation." And that is using the same term in more than one way, resulting in a misleading argument. So what Michael Bird is doing is he is trying to take the term inferior, which historically, I mean, you'll find this in the Confessions, the Westminster Confession. I'd have to go back and look now, but I'm pretty sure this is the language of the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith as well. But you're going to find that the term inferior is used there, and it's referring to rank, right? So if you were a professional athlete playing on a football team, let's say, and you have the owner of the team, and then beneath them in rank is the head coach of the team, and beneath him in rank is, all the coaching staff, and you have the quarterback who often takes a leadership role, on the field with the players, maybe in the locker room, and then you have people who are beneath him that are doing what he is requesting, right? And certainly doing what the coach is requesting, and they do what the general manager and the owner and so on and so forth, what they request, right? In none of those scenarios do we ever look at those men as somehow being less of a human being, right? We don't look at the owner of the company as automatically being more of a human being and having greater intrinsic worth as a human being than say the quarterback or the lineman or the running back or whoever, right? We don't look at him as being more human than the head coach, right? And certainly not just because his rank is higher or ahead of the head coach, right? So it's a fallacious argument, right? When you're at work, you don't think of the boss, right, or the owner of the company as being more human than you are, right? He happens to have authority in that company that you don't have, right? Or to a greater degree than what you have. But it doesn't make him more intrinsically human than you are, right? So this is a classic category error, one that's obvious. It's just a grotesque blunder, right? And in his Substack article, Bird tries to imply that you're infantilizing the women, right? And so his argument, therefore, to be logically consistent, must mean he believes that the children are subhuman, right? that kids or infants, babies, and so forth, that they're all subhuman, right? Because otherwise, um, that argument just doesn't work. But what it does do, it pricks on the emotions of both the women and the white knights out there, who are looking to come in and freak out and argue about this kind of content. Um, and so he kind of plays on their emotions, right? So let's keep going. See a little bit more of what he has said. He says, first, not every woman is going to get married. And then among those that do, not every woman can have children or needs to have children. There's nothing wrong with celibacy. So this is, by the way, if you don't know, um, I'm skipping to his article about Harrison Butker, and maybe I didn't make that clear, so I'm going to back up and make that clear. Right? Um, I'm going to address all of these together with the scripture at the end. So first, he talks about infantilizing, the women, and thus arguing against God's created order. Right? He's hating God's created order here and denying any hierarchy that exists. In fact, before I even get into really going through what he said about Harrison Butker here, I should say he even finds ways to argue with men who compromise on the created order, um, who don't completely go full egalitarian, but they just they'll try to say, "Oh, there's a authority of counsel, not an authority of command," because to these guys, having an authority of command must mean that you have a direct and immediate uh, punishment device, right? Discipline device. The rod, so to speak. And you know what? I don't want to get into that foolishness because that's just these guys trying to um, the ones that make that argument, they're just trying to look good to the egalitarians. The egalitarians don't care; they're never going to accept their argument, and they're always going to criticize it. Hence, Michael Bird and his criticism, um, which is directly related to this article, by the way. But then you see that it's the whole created order, really, because Harrison Butker goes and makes his speech. And if you don't know who he is a Kansas City Chief, Super Bowl champion, place kicker. And he recently, and when I say recently, probably I'm going to say about 5 or 6 weeks ago, maybe, um, was giving a speech at his alma mater, and he was exhorting women to and encouraging them, right? Not just exhorting them, but he's encouraging them and talking about the importance of motherhood and being a wife, and how much that's going to mean to so many of these women, even more so than ever having a career or a degree or any of those things, which is true, by the way. It's a true statement. Um, and it's in accord with God's created order, right? It's the way God designed women to be, right? And he gives a speech, and he's he's talking up, and he's giving valor to women who embrace this role, and he's really seeking to encourage them and talk about the lies that they get told, right? So of course we have our white knight, Mr. Bird, who has to run to the rescue, so to speak. And he says, first, not every woman is going to get married. And then among those that do, not every woman can have children or needs to have children. There's nothing wrong with celebrating someone being a wife and mother. But if you valorize it too much, then you alienate the many women who, by circumstances or calling, do not get married or do not have children. Many women are single by choice. Others are single by death, divorce, or desertion. They are not believing a satanic lie. They are often following a different path to your wife Isabel, or else trying to play the cards that they have been dealt. Right. And before I even respond to this, I'm going to bring up the other thing that he said in the same article he wrote about Harrison Butker. He says, the notion of homemaker is a modern concept. That's laughable. That is like the most insane, and yeah, I'm going to say it's stupid um, statement that I've ever heard, right? Until 10 minutes ago in human history, until 10 minutes ago, especially in church history, the idea of a woman being anything other than a homemaker is unheard of. That's the modern concept right now. We can go into how they were homemakers, because no, it didn't always look exactly alike. We could go into what a homemaker is and so on and so forth, right? But before we even do that, let's just acknowledge the foolishness of his statement. I mean, that's laughable. That's laughable, right? He's actually trying to say that it's a modern concept, the notion of a woman who uh, minds the home and domestic things and the rearing of children and so forth, right? Like, um, I just I don't have much patience with that kind of foolishness and silliness, right? So let's just go back. So Harrison Butker is number one. He's referencing God's created order. He's not only referencing the created order, but he's referencing what's known as the telos, or the purpose of marriage and sex, the purpose of male and female coming together, right? The purpose of our lives, right? God has said that he desires godly offspring. He said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, right? By the way, that command, the dominion mandate, has never been rescinded. It has never been rescinded, right? So that's a number one, right? Not only has it been repeated multiple times, but it doesn't have to be, because if it isn't abrogated, then it continues unless there are specific scriptural necessities that make that a conclusion that you have to draw, right? Like a logical deduction. An inescapable logical deduction, I should say, not just a possible one, but an inescapable one, a logical necessity, right? So he's ignoring the telos and the created order of mankind, right? And so Harrison Butker, though, is referencing that, and he's saying that this is a good thing, and this is something to be embraced and accepted and celebrated, and there should be valor to it, right? It should be valorized, it should be praised and held high, right? And at the same time, he's speaking in a generality. I don't think Harrison Butker is out there saying, I think that every last woman who has ever drawn breath on this earth is going to be married and is definitely going to have children, right? And he doesn't need to be saying that, right? He doesn't need to go and carve out every single exception to the rule, right? Speaking in generalities is a biblical thing, right? It's done over and over and over again. The Lord Jesus did it. The Apostle Paul did it. Many of your prophets and so forth have done it, right? I'll just bring up one example: all Cretans, right? When Paul talks about all Cretans, what do we think that he's talking about, right? So I don't I don't know. I don't think that he is that ignorant, and I think he understands that. Just like when he thinks Paul's talking about all Cretans are liars, right? Um, I don't think he's confused that Paul means that there's not a single Cretan out there who hasn't told a lie, right? Or every Cretan out there does nothing but lie, right? I don't think that Michael Bird would read that and try to make that claim, right? Um, and we all inherently know when Paul says all Cretans are liars, right? That he's not saying every single Cretan will lie, right? And every single Cretan will be characterized by lying, and you will be deceived by every single Cretan, right? That's not what he's saying. And so when we read this response, it's really trying to emotionally manipulate. This is an emotional cudgel. It's used to beat people over the head with, with this emotional manipulation, right? To get them to drop their line of argumentation. And wherever you see this tactic being used, that's what's happening, right? Now, are there times where it's appropriate to bring up the immorality of something and uh, to appeal to our sympathies? Yes, but only when we see that there is a clear transgression of a command, right? There's a clear um, victimization or violation of some type of law of God, and it's we don't have to speculate to get to it. We don't have to twist things to get to it. It's black and white. It's cut and dry. We see it. It's not in question, and so then it's just saying that we need to uphold God's law here. It's not saying that we're going to try to twist everybody, twist their arm, and manipulate them into accepting that this is somehow a transgression of law. No, it would be clear that it's a transgression of law. Let me give you an example, right? If someone went out and murdered 20 people, right, it would be right to appeal upon the sympathies and the emotions of people once this person has been demonstrated to be guilty, to do justice on them, right? So then you do appeal to their emotions and their sympathies, right, for the victims. So that way the eye has no pity and we do not spare, right? um, that's when it's appropriate to appeal to those kinds of emotions, right? But an inappropriate way would be to insinuate that, as an example, everybody is racist. And so, I'm going to try to manipulate you into accepting that you're a racist. And then I'm going to do that so I can manipulate you into being silent on something, um, or to take a particular action that I want, or just abstain from taking action at all, right? That is how they use this emotional cudgel. They try to take people who aren't necessarily guilty of something, and they want to make it like they are. And what they do is um, they appeal to the sentiments and emotions of a different group that you don't want to offend, right? Whether for good reasons or for bad reasons. So they'll appeal to women. They'll appeal to white knights out there, egalitarians, feminists, right? Or they'll appeal to, minorities. They'll appeal to um, those who are in the high and lofty places of evangelicalism, whatever group it might be, right? So here we go. Michael Bird says, not every woman is going to get married. Not every woman is going to have children or needs to, right? Well, again, that wasn't what Harrison Butker was saying, was it? But here's the thing. God designed his creation in such a way that most women would get married, right? That it would be the rule that most women would get married, and the exception to the rule would be women who don't get married, right? Um, what if it's hard for them to get married? Well, we understand that and we can have sympathy towards that, but that doesn't mean that we jettison the rule or that we walk on eggshells when we talk about the rule. No, we just talk about the rule plainly, right? Um, so most women will get married, and of those, most will have children, right? In fact, there's going to be many women who don't get married who do have children, and we can see that in our society around us, and that's a problem, right? That's a huge problem. Um, so um, his criticism here is kind of silly and manipulative. And then he says there's nothing wrong with celebrating someone being a wife and mother. No kidding. In fact, there's everything right with it. There's everything right with it. Then he says, but if you valorize it too much, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Bird, Michael, you're wrong. You can't valorize it too much, right? Or if you could, certainly our culture and our most ardent conservative patriarchal Christians in our culture are nowhere even close to valorizing it too much, right? We live in a Christian culture where sometimes abortion is considered acceptable, and certainly they don't want to criminalize the mother, right, for killing her own baby, for murdering her own baby, right? We live in a Christian culture where there's all kinds of talk about contraceptive and not having children and waiting to have children and even not getting married. And so this is just stupid rhetoric, right? These are people who need to actually repent of their position, right? And seek to do what the Lord has designed them to do, has designed marriage for, designed sex for, the telos of male and female and them coming together, right? Being image bearers of God, to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, right? So we need to reclaim that in our Christian culture, and we do need to valorize it, right? So and why wouldn't we, right? All these faithful women who are going and raising children, and they're working hard to maintain a household, right, and to care for the little ones, and God has gifted them in a special way to be able to do that and do that well, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Why would we not valorize it, right? So let me go to his reasoning and show you why this is wrong. Right? He says, then you'll alienate many women who, by circumstances or calling, you see him slide that in there, you alienate these women who don't get married or don't have children. Well, for starters, they have no need whatsoever to get alienated. They shouldn't be alienated. In fact, it's probably a sin issue on their part if they do, right? Now, I'm not going to say that there isn't someone who might be in a particularly painful moment in their life, right? And where they would be the ones that, while we're rejoicing with those who rejoice in their marriages and their children, we also weep with those who weep in those particular tough moments. But we don't hold them in those moments. We don't leave them in those moments. And we help them get out of those moments, meaning they don't fixate on that. That's not their whole identity, right? You don't identify with your immediate circumstances and consider the praise of anything outside of that to be an attack on you, right? Just like when you have pastors who are trying to get into the the rich and savory meat of the word, the application of the word, right? The practical application in life and culture and business and in your home, in politics, all of those things. You don't consider that an attack on the milk of the word, right? The very foundational basics, applying, going to the applications that go beyond, right, is not an attack on the foundations. Just like that, a praise for what God has created to be normative and to be the purpose for most people is not an attack on you if you don't fit into that bill, right? If there's something different about you for whatever reason, right? We know in the scripture that there were wombs that God opened, but there are also wombs that God closed, right? And even though it was clearly difficult in some of these passages for like barren women as an example, at the same time there was never a thought given by God that there should ever be any slowing down of or avoiding of valorizing and celebrating and seeking being a wife and being a mother, right? So that was something that God could come alongside that woman and comfort her, but the whole culture wasn't supposed to almost apologize for the idea of motherhood, simply so she didn't feel left out. She has to feel left out and work through those emotions. And maybe God will open her womb later on, and maybe He won't, right? But she has to be able to go through that tough season. And no one's saying be intentionally cruel to her. We're just saying that on the same token, she can't take everything as an attack against her, or that it's some type of horrendous pain that everybody else has to feel to the point where they don't feel like they can celebrate that which God created to be celebrated, right? Marriage, which is an image of Christ and the church, right? It's a picture of the gospel, right? It is to be celebrated. It is to be out there, celebrated out front, unashamedly, without any equivocation, without any explanation, without any apology. That is how we are to just unabashedly celebrate it. And the same thing with children, right? So there's no couching our statements with this kind of other language that seeks to make sure the other people know that we're not making an attack on you. No, that should be your built-in presupposition, right? As we celebrate that, in fact, the command of you rejoicing with those who rejoice, person who is in a painful situation, and I do understand that. Um, like I've gone through very painful moments in my life where, as an example, it might be hard to rejoice with someone who's getting married, but nonetheless, that is the command on me. I must celebrate that other person's marriage and be happy for them, right? And not consider it an attack on me or seek to cry woe is me to everybody out there, because I have something difficult going on in my own life, right? um, this kind of relates to the recent episode we did about being a snowflake, right? We can't be snowflakes in that way. So I'm gonna throw a flag on that and say no, that's just rank manipulation, Mr. Bird. Also wanted to say that he mentions women who by calling don't get married or don't have children. And I find that even more suspect because I think what he's hinting at in a subtle way is a type of calling that women don't get, right? We'll just leave it at that. So then he says many women are single by choice. Okay, well, then they shouldn't feel like a victim, right? They should be able to cheer on what Mr. Butker says and have nothing ill to say about it and feel no offense there if they're single by choice, right? Um, but while we say that, what are their motivations for being single? Is it to be a career woman? Because that would be sinful, right? That's going against the created order and the way God designed them to chase after something that was never designed to be theirs, right? So, is that why? Are they doing it to seek riches, right? There's nothing wrong with having certain kind of material blessings, but at the same time, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? So we are not to be lovers of money and avoid what God has said and the way God has designed things to be and to operate in order to chase wealth, right? Is it to avoid having children? Is it to be intentionally fruitless? That is generally a sin, right? I'm sure that someone will get up in arms and they'll come out with their personal, well, what if they have cancer? What if they have a brain tumor? What if they, have this? It should be obvious in what I'm saying that I'm not talking about those people. But for your sake, I will say I'm not talking about those people, right? And then it says others are single by death. That's otherwise known as being a widow or a widower, right? Um, so they were married, right? They were married. They might even have children. So obviously they would not be part of this group. Like he's just looking to put every person in every situation he can possibly imagine in there, and almost kind of implying that they should be offended by this, right? When honestly, the widows that I know have sought to be good and faithful wives, and also to seek to be loving and godly mothers, right? And so they wouldn't be offended by Mr. Butker. They'd be more likely to be offended by Mr. Bird. But be that as it may, and then he mentions divorce, right? Well, 70% of all divorces are initiated by women. And when you get to the college educated career women, that increases by 10%, right? So there you go, right? I'm not going to look at them and talk to them as though they're all victims. Most of them aren't, right? Desertion, he mentions. Okay, I can see that woman, if she was deserted, she's been victimized, right? But nonetheless, if she was divorced or deserted, she was married and possibly has kids, right? So again, none of this should be offensive to them. Now, if he's saying, oh, well, it might bring up a point of pain that they had, this is the kind of thing that people need to get over, right? We have to be able to work through. We can't sit there and say, oh, because I have this pain point in my life, and it could be a horribly, horribly painful experience, right? Divorce and desertion and the death of a loved one, those are things that are seriously painful, right? But we can't use them to somehow say, well, therefore, everybody has to coddle me for the remainder of my life. They have to cater all of their speech to me. And by the way, we're going to subvert God's created order. No, absolutely not. Right? That's ridiculous. We can't go there, and we can't be listening to people who go there. Then he says they're not believing a satanic lie. Well, again, Mr. Bird, the overwhelming majority of the people you just referenced would have been amongst the wives, mothers, homemakers that Harrison Butker was praising and referring to, and they definitely wouldn't be amongst your list of people who somehow supposedly have a reason to be offended or hurt or alienated by this statement. It's stupid, right? Everything that you say doesn't have to be maximally inclusive, right? That's part of the problem that we have. We try to like torture language until it's maximally inclusive. It's ridiculous. It's unnecessary, right? It's just creating snowflakes out of people, right? And it says, then they are often following a different path to your wife as well. This is the appeal to the different path, right? So he's taking all these other situations who were not following a different path to Harrison Butker's wife, Isabel, right? But they were following the exact same type of path. So then he's taking a small percentage of the people that he's. So what he does is he's trying to make an argument for these career women, right? These women who, they want to subvert God's created order, and they just want to go for money and status and power. They want to have their own legacy, right? And they don't want to share that with anybody. They don't want to have their legacy be a part of somebody else's legacy, even though it will be to some extent, if not entirely, right? Because if they're going and creating a career, chances are they're working for somebody else, and so they're building that person's legacy along with their own, right? Even Michael Jordan built other people's legacies, right? So here's the thing: he's trying to take these, these career women, these feminists, and so forth, and I think it's implied also by some of his language that he's talking about these women who go to false churches, right, synagogues of Satan, and they seek to become the pastor there, right? And he's saying that these women who follow this different path, right? That they're alienated, and we should look at them like they're some kind of victim, and so we definitely shouldn't be valorizing homemaking, right? That's ridiculous. And then the last thing he says is, or else they're trying to play the cards that they have been dealt, right? Well, nobody has denied anybody's playing the cards that they've been dealt, right? But I don't think Harrison Butker's speech did any of that. That Michael Bird is accusing him of. And I think that by and large, we need to avoid falling into the trap of that type of rhetoric, right? So let's just look at a few things, right? If this was such an alienating thing, this happened back in May 17th, but his jersey, his number 7 jersey, was incredibly popular with men, but more so with women, where it actually at the time had sold out, right? So the women's jersey, the people that he's supposedly alienating and offending and all of this, right, that somehow he's somehow speaking against, right? They're the ones whose his jersey is most popular with, right? Like they've flooded to get his jersey and not the White Knight, Travis Kelce, or however you say his last name, right? All right, let's keep going. I'm going to read from 1 Peter chapter 3. If you've followed this channel, you've heard this brought up a few times, but it says, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, that they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. Right? And then later in the passage, saying that the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are his children if you do good and do not fear anything that's frightening. All right, so the Apostle Peter here, who was instructed directly by Jesus himself, is saying that there is a submission, and that even if the man is sinful or an unbeliever, he does not obey the word, that she is to submit to him, to be gentle and quiet and seek to win him without a word, and she's to be obedient to him, even to the point of calling him Lord, and that is good. That is like the standard to be pursued, right? But the thing to recognize here also, so you have this woman who is respectful, as we see in verse 2, right? 1 Peter 3:2. And that word respectful is the same word that's used to discuss fear of the Lord. It's also the same word for respect that's used in Ephesians chapter 5. I believe it's verse 30 or 31. And the idea here is a reverent respect, right? This is a higher respect than you have for other men, right? This man has the ultimate of respect that you have for any other human being is given to the husband by the wife. And with that, it's noted that she is to be in submission to him. She is to obey him. She is to be, we don't like the word subservient, but literally when you look up the meaning of this word, it's subservient, right? So I'm not going to avoid that because none of it means what Michael Bird wants it to mean. See, here's the thing is they want to say, well, if your role is that you rank lower and so that you have to follow those who are in authority above you, you must somehow be subhuman and less than them, right? That you can't be equally human and not have equal authority, right? Well, that's stupid, right? Because we know all kinds of relations. Every time at least two or more people are working towards one goal, right? They have one common mission. They come together as one group or organization. You will have a leader, right? You will have one that the other people submit to, right? And usually it's a formal type of arrangement where you have like a government and there's certain people who have a certain level of authority and then the people who are beneath them submit to them. And there might be people beneath them who submit to those people, right? But the point is that there's a hierarchy there. God instituted it. It's both natural and normal. There's nothing insidious about it or nothing dehumanizing about it, right? There's a difference between exercising authority and lording authority over people. And usually when people have a difficulty understanding this, right, whether it be through experience in their life or just a deficiency in their logic or understanding, when they have a hard time with that concept, they usually cannot understand the difference between a woman not having the same rank and a woman still having the same ultimate value as a human being, right? But nonetheless, the reformers all historically unanimously said, and this wasn't just the reformers, I mean, this goes all the way back, that unanimously the husband was in authority over the wife. And there were places where, how gender worked out in the church and society and so forth in the early church when they were still going to pagan nations and the pagans still had some of their pagan practices, which might have involved women having authority over men, right, in some context or other, all of which are forbidden. That had to be worked out, and it was worked out. By the middle of the 4th century, 3rd or 4th century, you saw that was pretty much entirely worked out. But even amongst the overwhelming majority of the Christians, especially those who came from some type of Jewish background, right, or were in a predominantly Jewish area or whatnot, they had no trouble with this. They understood this, right? It was really only the pagans that had any difficulty with it whatsoever, right? So then Titus 2:3-5, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so And so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. So these are women that not only love their husbands and children, but they work at home and they're submissive to their husbands, right? And these are things that are done so that the word of God may not be reviled. Um, all right. So that word right there, by the way, when it comes to talking about the women who are working at home, uh, that word is or oikorgos, I believe is how it's pronounced, oikorgos. And what that means is a worker at home, keeper at home, homemaker, right? Um, this is a woman who is mindful of domestic things, right? But let's look at, if you look at the qualifications of a deacon and elder in 1 Timothy 3:4 and 1 Timothy 3:12, right, you are going to see that he has to rule his own house well, right, having his children in submission with all reverence. And again, deacons rule their children and their house as well, right? So this is not something that should be confused. Now, by the way, I did read that from the New King James. King James reads similarly. Some of the other versions kind of water it down a little bit, and they don't go with what the actual, like, real meaning is of that word. And so they'll say manage their house as well. But this is a husband who rules his house well. And if you look at the Greek, they try to use manage there for the husband and then manage for the wife. But when you look at it, hers is a subordinate duty in the house that is mindful to domestic things, and him is to be the ruler of the house who delegates authority, right? It doesn't have to be, usually this is where you get the crazy iron-fisted tyrant type of, mischaracterizations and straw man arguments that got thrown out. But this is the design of the home. And so you have guys like Michael Bird out there who are railing against God's created order. They're railing against the design of the home. And why? Why would you go out and find any excuse whatsoever to criticize a guy named Harrison Butker? Now, he may have problems. You could criticize him for being Roman Catholic, right? He's a Roman Catholic. And presumably, I mean, I don't know if he's a true, teacher of the word, if he's gone through all of the dogmas that Rome has and holds to them, right, and rejects Protestantism knowingly, right? He rejects the true gospel of salvation that is by grace through faith in Christ alone, right? So you could criticize him on that, right? But it could be that he is someone who is saved, who doesn't understand those differences, especially growing up in an American context. Maybe he does believe that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and doesn't realize that there's a difference between that and the Roman Catholic Church. That's possible, right? But certainly what he said, you can get on about that and, okay, fine, that's fine. But what he said about God's created order, right, the created norms, and the created roles of a man and woman and so forth, what he said about that was 100% true. And I see no legitimate, valid reason to go and find a reason to try to criticize him. I especially find this to be true with those people who will platform people in positions that God has explicitly forbidden from them. He's explicitly denied that. So that would be the position of a woman who seeks to be the teacher of doctrine, the expositor of doctrine, a woman who seeks to teach men or to rule over men at all in any context. And those are separate, by the way. That's not all one thing. This is separate. So as an example, if somebody were to platform and encourage Amy Bird in what she does, where she's barely even Christian now, the last time I checked on it, where she's saying things that are virtual apostasy, right? You look at that, You look at what she's doing, which is even when her doctrine was at its best, her actions were demonstrating what she truly believed, were clearly in opposition to some very basic, explicit, undeniable scriptural commands, right? So, I find someone very suspect when they argue against the created order like that. They criticize someone like Harrison Butker for praising and valorizing wives and mothers who are devoted to their families, right? And yet, at the same time, these people are going to try to platform or praise or encourage someone like, as an example, an Amy Bird, right? Or a Jen Wilkin would be another one, right? These are people who we have no business encouraging, supporting, praising, right? Because they're doing something that's sinful, right? So that's going to be it for now. Hopefully, you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, if you found it beneficial, please make sure to share this with some of your friends. Again, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe and click on the bell icon for notifications and smash that like button. That really helps us out. If you didn't like this, you can feel free to let us know in the comments. We love your comments, whether they're good and positive or whether they're critical of us. We love you interacting with us and telling us what you think. And again, if you didn't like this, make sure you hit that thumbs down button twice. All right, until next time, God bless.